We are learning more about U.S. Private Travis King, who officials say willfully and intentionally sprinted across the border into North Korea from South Korea at the demilitarized zone that separates the two countries. Family members of Private Travis King are now speaking out, saying that the U.S. soldier was breaking down before crossing into North Korea. They say he was a quiet kid who enjoyed reading the Bible. He started acting reckless, though, after the death of a young cousin. North Korea continues to stay silent about King's whereabouts and condition. This comes as negotiations between the U.S. and North Korea over its nuclear weapons program have hit a standstill. Paul Reichhoff back with us, host of Independent American podcast. So this situation, as we learn more about his mental state, how does that impact the negotiations? This is a U.S. soldier. He is being held by North Korea, and he may have been troubled before these movements.
Well, we were talking earlier about wild times. Well, they're not limited to inside the borders of the United States. I mean, the international situation is extremely precarious and dynamic, and this is just the latest example. I spent almost 20 years, Marnie, working with veterans and troops of all kinds, all different services, and I've seen all different kinds of problems. I've seen post-traumatic stress disorder. I've seen severe trauma. I've seen terrible injuries. And I know one thing, we're all Americans, and we don't really know what this guy's situation is, but we know he's an American, and we got to get him back. We got to get him back home, get him back to the Department of Defense, who definitely has a couple things they want to go over with him, and then we can sort it out back here in our own house. But right now, North Korea is an adversary. They've got one of our own. They've got a son of America. We got to bring him back here, ensure that he's healthy, ensure that he's safe, ensure that he's not used as a political hostage, which is much bigger than his own story. And again, we talked about Putin and others who love to see America distracted, who love to see America divided. And right now, we should be, I think, universally focused on getting him home. If he faces trial or some other kind of criminal situation back here in associated with UCMJ, we can do that. But number one priority is we leave no Americans behind under any situation, and we need to get him home.
Yeah, the focus is on a safe resolution and getting him home. But you have to wonder if he was troubled and there were some allegations against him, disciplinary action potentially, why would the U.S. military leave him unaccompanied in this moment as he's coming to the United States? I mean, do we know why that is, what protocol is?
We don't, Marnie, but I think heads are going to roll. I mean, I don't know how this guy got loose. I don't know how he was wandering around in a tour. I mean, I've been a platoon leader, responsible for the lives of 38 young men. And this is not something you allow to happen. I'm sure people will be held accountable. In addition to Private King, there should be an extensive investigation because, again, it's not just about him. I mean, we don't know what exactly the extent of his service in the military. We know he was a Cav Scout, but he's an asset. He could have intelligence value. He could have strategic value. We need to get him back. And whatever led to this breakdown, there needs to be a full investigation and ensure it never happens again.
Yeah, very troubling on a lot of fronts. There are new developments with Russia's war and invasion of Ukraine. Russia warned that it would attack ships sailing to Ukraine's Black Sea port after the Black Sea grain deal fell through. Putin has left the door open, Paul, to restore that deal. How likely do you think that will happen, and what are the larger implications that concern this situation?
Well, Putin wants to continue to disrupt the world and choke Ukraine. And by hitting grain shipments, by hitting infrastructure, he continues to try to starve out the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian military and NATO. So disrupting any kind of grain flow, any kind of production, any kind of supply chains will have an impact far beyond Ukraine. So I think this is another example of why this is about much more than Ukraine. Putin wants to obviously hobble Ukraine, but this impacts America. This impacts Europe. This impacts anybody who buys anything that has grains in it. So I think it shows how this war continues to extend and disrupt the lives of more than just Ukrainians. And Putin's going to do anything he can. He continues to be desperate. He's going to pull every card he can, and I wouldn't trust anything he says ever.
Yeah, including using cluster munitions, which he claims he hasn't done and is threatening that he will do so. What are the concerns about that point of battle?
Yeah, I mean, cluster munitions have been used by the Russians throughout this war. I mean, they're also bombing civilians on a regular basis. They're raping and pillaging. I mean, they violated just about every single war crime. I know that cluster munitions are in the headlines now because we recently sent some to Ukraine, which many could debate. I would argue we may not have to, but at the end of the day, I think we have to understand that Putin fights by a different set of rules. He doesn't abide by the rules. He doesn't abide by the Geneva Convention. He is a war criminal, and he's targeting civilians and civilian civilian cities every single day. That's why we should be unified against him, why we have to support our Ukrainian allies, and think about the American standards. This is what our troops don't do. This is what our military doesn't do. We have to go above and beyond the expectations and set the example for the world, just like every generation of Americans has.
Paul, we're seeing the head of the Wagner mercenary group, Prigozhin, Yevgeny Prigozhin, saying that the group will not fight in Ukraine. What's your thoughts on the latest Prigozhin sighting and how that plays into all of this?
I want to know what Putin gave him. I mean, Prigozhin had a coup underway. They were just over 100 kilometers away from Moscow. And very quickly, all of a sudden, Prigozhin and his troops are gone and over to Belarus. So it looks like Putin cut a deal with him. Who knows what he gave him? But until he's dead, I think Prigozhin is always going to be a threat to Putin. I think there are a lot of other names inside of Putin that are inside of Russia that are threats to Putin that we don't know about. But the walls are closing in around Putin. The longer this goes on, the more public trust erodes in his leadership, and the more he's going to see the Russian people fight back, just like they did on Afghanistan. Over time, the casualties in Afghanistan for Russia mounted. The public pressure at home started to weaken the war effort, just like it did here in Vietnam. So I think we're going to see that happen, especially in the days to come as more and more body bags come home to Russia.
Paul Reichhoff, as always, appreciate our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Marnie.